Hello and welcome to the Ashkenaz Festival podcast. My name is Max Mandel. All my life, I have been keenly aware that my name had meaning. As a kid growing up in the 80s in Toronto, I knew that Max was a cool and unusual name. But before I could even remember anything else, I knew I was named after someone magical, my grandfather, an immigrant from a tiny town in Poland who became a musical star against all odds. The legend stared back at me in glorious black and white, pictures of him and my beautiful booby in photo albums and on the walls. I came to learn that the foundational story of my father's life was the search for his lost father, and of course that in turn affected every aspect of my relationship with my father. Looking back, I guess there was always a little pressure there. Was I capable of inheriting this legacy? Was there something in my DNA that could succeed as my grandfather and namesake did to become a professional musician? Everyone who knew my father, Professor Michael Mandel, can tell you that he had an unbridled enthusiasm for life and wanted all of his passions and loves to be yours as well. He wanted you to be as outraged about injustice as he was, to savor every bit of Yiddishkeit the way he did, to suffer the indignity of being a Leafs fan the way he did, and to be as overwhelmed by the thrills that his favorite music gave him. If he hadn't had to deal with such a tragic loss at an early age, he might not have had that insatiable and contagious zest for life. We definitely wouldn't have this wonderful book, which is infused with his famous enthusiasm. I'm so pleased that we have this opportunity to bring you some choice selections from my father's last book, The Jewish Hour, the golden age of a Toronto Yiddish radio show and newspaper, as read by Alon Nashman, along with some recordings of my grandfather Max Mandel from his radio show. Thanks for listening.
Der jiddische Nigen auf ewig wird sein. Der jiddische Nigen kriegt in a Herz rein. Gol ist leid der Jid in wandern schein mit. Sein einziger Nechame ist doch nur das Lied. Der Jid leid zu es viel, doch wenn kommt in Schiel, dem alten Scheinem Nigen singt der Jid mit a Gefühl.
I hardly knew my father. He died when I was 4. But throughout my life, I heard about the wonders of his voice and his great fame as the sweet singer from Apt on various versions of the Jewish radio hour. Music was a legacy he passed on to me. He also left me with a mystery and a quest.
Ist mein einzig Gebet. Nimm für mir zu, von Mensch dem Nummen, nimm für mir zu die
Through the music and adventures of the Jewish Hour and the pages of the newspaper that sponsored it, this book takes us on a journey back to a rich and pivotal time in recent Jewish history when the Yiddish-speaking immigrant, newly arrived in the North American diaspora from the shtetls of Eastern Europe, struggled to make sense of the new world through Jewish eyes, and even to try and transform it.
Ich will sein ein Ochs oder ein Pferd, in Spann ackern die Erd, und hub ma Wert, a Wert. Ich will sein ein Pferd oder ein Ochs, wenn man nicht kein des Großes.
My father had a show on a variety of radio stations from 1936 to 1953. They called it the Jewish Hour, the Jiddische Stunde. All over North America there were these shows, and his was the Toronto one. The centerpiece of these shows was Yiddish song, and my father left lots of beautiful recordings made for the show. But the shows also had drama, poetry, culture, politics, and news.
Der jiddischer Nigen auf ewig wird sein. Der jiddischer Nigen kriegt ihr Herz.
days of radio, shows were often linked to newspapers, and this one was linked to an extraordinary Yiddish newspaper called the Kanader Nayes, the Canadian News, that came to your door or your newsstand inside the great New York Yiddish newspapers, primarily Vorwärts, the Forward. The people who produced the Kanader Nayes newspaper were activist intellectuals in what could fairly be said to be the main current of Jewish opinion, socialist, but anti-communist, Zionist, and Yiddishist. This story loosely follows the life of the musically and dramatically talented Max Mandel, a young Jewish immigrant from the venerable shtetl of Abt in southern Poland, who arrives virtually penniless in Toronto, gravitates to the local music scene, and lands on the first permanent Jewish radio hour in Canada, where he rises to be a star.
The Rebbe can helfen, versessene Maiden, wie soll, als will, helft
I set out to find my father and his radio show, but on the way discovered the Jewish hour in a much bigger sense, a unique time in Jewish history, as seen through the very eyes of the Yiddish-speaking immigrant struggling to find a way in a new and unfamiliar place.
Kann machen als Almunes, so loben Kinder, fragt nicht, wie soll. Weil als der Rebbe will, ein kleines Kind als will, oi, 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 als singt mit dem Rebbenskeuer. Legt die Hände auf Fett, wird ihr geholfen gleich, weil als der Rebbe will, schießt ab Baby mal. I think I have you. I speak to baseball or I speak to the man.
Besides a few family legends, I knew very little about my father's career as an entertainer. That is, until I was asked by the Ashkenaz Festival in 2004 to look into the origins of Yiddish radio in Canada. The festival director at that time had the idea of doing a local version of what Henry Sapoznik had created in New York, the Yiddish Radio Project. My first stop was the Ontario Jewish Archives, where the Kanader Nayes newspaper was collected. I opened up the 1936 volume at random and started gingerly flipping through the pages back to front, in other words, Gentile style, when what do I see but my father's dashing wedding picture, which, like every father's son, I had seen on the walls and mantelpieces all my life. Here, the photo was accompanied by the caption, Max Mandel, artist on the Jewish Radio Hour. Above it was a picture of S.M. Greenfield, General Director and Announcer of the Jewish Radio Hour. And beside that was a story starting Jewish Radio Hour conclusion from page 1. So I flipped to the front page. Erste Jiddische Radiostunde ruft Arois Fried. The first Jewish Radio Hour calls forth joy. Last Sunday, Ontario Jews had a pleasant surprise. Suddenly, the radio began to speak our own mother tongue, Yiddish. It was reported to us that some Jews of the older generation interrupted what they were doing to make a Shehechionu. The program was excellent regarding both the choice of material and the artistic execution. The artists who participated were as follows. The musical literary director of the above radio hour was the trained cantor Nathan Stolnitz. His capable son, Sam Stolnitz, one of the province's best singers and a scholarship winner at the Toronto Conservatory. The sweet singer of folk songs, Max Mandel. And the stage darling and movie actor, Benny Adler. From now on, the Jewish Hour will be heard each Sunday morning from 9:30 to 10:30 on station CKOC. Do not forget to turn on your radio next Sunday for new surprises. Talk about calling forth joy. My Yiddish was weak and I could only make out a few of the words, but it was enough to send me hopping around the archives, barely able to control myself, whispering excitedly, showing the piece to every one of the studious volunteers working away on their clippings and photographs. My journey back to the world of my father had begun.
Mit Boden Payers, mit aller Meiles, gepassten schwere Scheiles, gelernt gemurre, gelernt Juredeie, hat viele nicht gewiss, bin kein Zuras mat Beie.
The Jews of Toronto were mostly of recent immigration, mostly from Poland, virtually all of them claiming Yiddish as their mother tongue. Though they made up less than 10% of Toronto's population, Jews were the largest non-British ethnic group by far. They were concentrated in the downtown wards. Spadina Avenue was essentially a Jewish street, as Jewish then as it is Chinese now, in both respects different only in size from New York City's Lower East Side. The Jewish Radio Hour began as a way for the newspaper to tap into the immense reach and advertising potential of the newer medium, which could travel huge distances in an instant over the airwaves. The first episode featured cantor Nathan Stolnitz, the musical literary director. He was not only a chazan, but also an authority on chazanut, the art of cantorial singing. Samuel Stolnitz, his capable son, was already concertizing as a chazandl, a child cantor, in Vilna before coming to Canada at age 12. He eventually settled into a long career as cantor at the Holy Blossom Temple in Toronto. Benny Adler, the stage darling and movie actor, was a well-established American Yiddish theater actor who had recently had a big part in the first Yiddish talkie, the critically acclaimed anti-Nazi and anti-war The Wandering Jew from 1933. Adler had come to Toronto for a concert at the Strand Theatre, but stayed on for additional performances in the region, including guest spots on the newly minted Jewish Radio Hour. Then there was my father. Here he is singing My Little Town Belts, which expresses the longing many Jews felt about their old shtetls. Max Mandel was one of tens of thousands of poor Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe who poured into Canada in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. He came to Canada on May 6, 1927 as an 18-year-old, born December 14, 1908, from the little shtetl of Apt on the Vistula River in south-central Poland near Krakow. Max was soon joined by his mother, brother, and 4 sisters, and even a niece, masquerading as a sister for immigration purposes. My little town Apt never left the heart of this Apter. He davened at the Apter synagogue, where he ultimately became president. He put on many benefit concerts for the Apter survivors of the Holocaust, and he was buried, along with many of his relatives, in the Apter section of the old Dawes Road Jewish Cemetery in Toronto. Apt was small, no more than 8,000 people, about 2/3 Jewish, and the town was built around a rectangular marketplace, which in my father's day had a market twice a week. There one could find all the trades and crafts necessary to sustain a population, right down to the oldest profession itself. There were cottage industries, notably in brushes, and Mandelbaum's famous soap candle and oil factory with the sign of the elephant. All this is vividly depicted in the beautiful folk paintings of Mayer Kirschenblatt, who left Abt just in time, and late in life, painted his memories of the town and described its workings in intimate detail. To know Abt, or any shtetl, you just have to read his book. Alongside its regulars and big-name guest stars, the Jewish Radio Hour always made room for new talents. The May 3rd, 1936 show introduced Isaac Sverdlov, who had just returned from New York and appeared with the renowned Maurice Schwartz Art Theatre to become a leading figure, along with his actress wife Adele Sverdlov, in Toronto Jewish theatre. Sverdlov introduced a strong theatrical element to the radio show. On the episode broadcast June 28, 1936, it was announced that there would be the first episode of a special feature, a life picture, which had been specially written for the show. A life picture, Lebensbild, was a genre of theatre that tried to portray real life and real characters by mixing tragic, comic, and sentimental elements. The cast of Life Picture included Isaac Sverdlov, Mr. Fogelnest, Max Mandel, Nathan Stolnitz, S.M. Greenfield, and two new talents, Miss Rudnick and Shirley Lieberman. Miss Rudnick was my mother, using her own maiden name. She never once mentioned being on the radio show, so it was something of a shock for me to see this. Then I remembered that Max and Hilda were said to have met at a theatre club.
A picture bist die am Chaya, darf ich Gott ein Bruder sein. Brüder, will du mir raten und hieten dich auf Schritt und Tritt. Oi, Kiste, mir soll sich dir dachten, als ich bin dein Bruder nicht. Oi, Malkele, Schwester, gemeint zu mir. Oi, Malkele, ich bin a Shigevadi.
From the point of view of its sponsors and operatives, the show was doing fabulously. But do we know what the listeners were thinking? In fact, we do. Though the show was studiously ignored by the rival Yiddish papers and the English press, we have a treasure trove of letters written by listeners to the Reader's Right section of the Kanader Nayes paper in inimitable Jewish immigrant style. Distinguished editor of the Kanader Nayes, I want to request some space in your distinguished newspaper to express my opinion about the Jewish Radio Hour. I very much do not want to be a critic, but since you announced on the radio that everyone can express his opinion, I want to give an evaluation. To speak truthfully, the first two radio hours were a lot more beautiful and better than the last two. I hope that the Jewish hour does not become commonplace and that the resources that come forward do not cheapen the beautiful Jewish radio hour. With esteem, Yitzhak Limonov, Grace Street. And another amateur critic wrote, The Jewish Hour is an important bedrock of Jewish culture and is justified not only in Toronto, but more so in all the towns and villages of Ontario where Jews live and the Jewish word cannot reach them otherwise than through the airwaves. And Mr. Greenfield, as the one who has made this possible, deserves a great thank you. Also, there is nothing to complain about in the program itself. I would not want at all to criticize and evaluate who is better or worse. Naturally, all the talent cannot be of the nobility, but it is very hard to speak about your radio hour and not mention such talents as Sverdlov in recitation and Max Mandel as singer and showman. There was a real special grace to his sketch, The Hard Luck Jew, which he performed more beautifully than beautiful the second Sunday with his theme L. Berman, 102 Uren Street. The address was written in Yiddish as 102 Uren Street, exactly the way my mother used to pronounce Huron Street, much to her children's delight. One that is especially dear to me is this one. Permit me to write in the readers section a few points about the Jewish Radio Hour. It is so important and necessary to have a Jewish hour in Toronto, I am certain, because the Jewish Radio Hour awakens the Jewish heart. I personally would not get up so early on Sunday, but because of the Jewish Radio Hour, I get up even earlier so I won't be late for the radio show. It is a great pleasure to hear a Yiddish word, and especially to hear the young, gifted, and talented singer Max Mandel. His singing is simply a pleasure to hear. Every word is so clear and heartfelt. I would never tire of hearing him sing and declaim. David Glazer, 342 Bathurst Street. My heart soared as I read letter after letter extolling the wonders of my father's voice and of his diction. Yiddish pronunciation can be a contentious issue. Max's sister, Sarah Kersner, who was a youngster of 13 when all this was happening, told me that everyone used to make fun of the way that the host, Mr. Greenfield, spoke Yiddish. His ads for his bailiff business were far more Yinglish than Yiddish. Wir collecten rents und anderen Käufes. Wir leihen Geld auf in mortgages und Automobilen. Wir managen properties. You get the idea. Or listen to how this ad for Bluestein's furniture store from the show is folded into an existing Yiddish song, the well-known hit Schein wie Levone, written by the great Joseph Rumshinsky.
Ihr stellt sich vor, die Preisen gut, die Klette, die Furniture, die Schente, alles kriegt ihr im Bluesteins Furniture Store. Chesterfield den Besten, a Kittenset den Grästen, alles was ihr darf, kriegt ihr im Bluesteins Furniture Store. Like the moon above you, the south reminds me of you. The angels knew I love you, so heaven sent you for me.
The Radio Hour was born at the height of Yiddish culture in Toronto. It spawned many live concerts, galas, fundraisers, and holiday gatherings in which my father figured prominently. There were 3 full-time Yiddish theaters and concert venues along Spadina Avenue at that time, often sold out for plays in a continuously shifting repertory and a steady stream of events and concerts. Of course, the birth of the Yiddish Radio Hour in 1936 also coincided with a darkening international horizon. Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy were already putting their war machines at the service of the Franco-Fascists in the Spanish Civil War, provoking an editorial in the Kanader Nayes, August 12, 1936, ruminating on, quote, symptoms of a new world war, end quote, though without any specific fears for the Jews. Birds of prey like Hitler and Mussolini, who look around for every opportunity to busy themselves with the duty of spilling human blood, are already sharpening their venomous beaks. The following letter won first prize in a contest run in the Kanader Nayes on the topic of why we need a Jewish Radio Hour. A chain of scorn, humiliation, and torture has, in recent times, encircled Jewish life throughout the whole world. In certain European countries, They want not only to destroy us physically, but what is even worse, they want to ruin us spiritually. They want to kill our souls, our culture, a culture which carries within itself the most beautiful pearls of human ethics. In this free land, we cover up our culture as if it had become a discarded one, and our youth, who have already almost forgotten our folk language, are daily becoming more and more torn, alienated, and estranged. They are in need of a means of rescue, a means which will at the same time renew and plant the values of Jewish culture. This, in such a time, is the service that can be done so fully by the Jewish Radio Hour. The radio, in general, has recently become the world's most powerful cultural force. Hitler has thus, through the radio, poisoned a whole people against us. Mussolini has thrown the Italian youth into the flames of death using this most beautiful invention. Why shouldn't we use the airwaves to protect and strengthen Jewish culture so as to fortify our resistance in the current dark historical days? The Jewish Radio Hour brings a ray of hope and strengthens the cultural ties between our own brother Jews, and we must bring to bear all means and efforts to sustain the Jewish Radio Hour. H. Weinstock.
Liebe ist das Glück, was macht das Leben angenehm. Also hat man gesucht mir und ich hab geglaubt in dem. Verliebt sich in ein Mädel, gestellt ein Chippig Leuch. Jetzt fragst mich von Liebe, weil ich euch erzähl. Oh.
Over the course of the coming years, the storm clouds hanging over Europe erupted into world war, and life for the Jews became a waking nightmare. In these years, the Yiddish Radio Hour became increasingly important to the community. Dire news and ominous announcements about the war and the fate of relatives in Europe were intently listened to in many Jewish homes from Rochester to Windsor. My father continued his busy schedule of performing on radio and in concert halls, but his tone shifted from joy to resolute hope. This is his version of the song Nein, nein, sie's keinmal nit gewein. No, no, it has never been, with the addition of this optimistic stanza. The evil Hitler got afraid of Russia because he was given a whiff of the powder of the Red Army. Once Nazism has been annihilated, and this has already been determined, America, Russia, and England will build a new world.
Der Russe Hitler hat vergossen sehr viel Menschenblut, gewollt vernichten in Upmecken, von der Welt der Jid. Von Russland hat sich erschrocken, dem geworfen in den Weg. Man hat ihm gegeben, Pilze schmecken, von der Reuterarmee. Es ist nicht du, nein, es ist keinmal nicht gewesen, es wird keinmal nicht sein.
I had found my father and the wonders of his voice at long last. And in the course of my research and writing, I derived untold nachas, a fairly untranslatable Hebrew Yiddish word describing an involuntary swelling of the heart with pleasure and pride, almost universally used now as what parents feel when their children do well.
Nein, es keinmal nicht gewesen, in anders kann es nicht sein.
My father loved music with every fiber of his being, something I have no doubt he inherited from my grandfather. Although he had a remarkable career as a law professor and an activist, part of him always longed for a different path as a musician. It will come as no surprise that he made all 5 of his kids learn an instrument.